Hi there, my name's Mark Downs and today I'm at Billy Makin fisheries to do a spot of waggler fishing. I was going to run through my tackle first of all, but I've only been sat here 15 minutes and I've started to catch a few fish straight away. This feels like a reasonable sized carp. At the moment I'm fishing a very light peacock waggler, taking just 3 BB with most of the shots situated right under the float. We'll look at the actual terminal tackle in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, but I've just started to get the fish actually coming up in the water. Although it's overcast and a little bit cloudy, the water's still very warm. And during these summer months, the fish will follow the bait up as it's introduced. And you can end up catching fish sometimes. This one seems to be going around the corner. There's 4 or 5 lakes at this fishery and they're all extremely good. Predominantly they're stocked with carp, but there's shoals and shoals of big roach. Some huge tension now. I've seen some up to £8 caught. But for action and sport, you can't beat these hard fighting carp. Here we go. First time I've seen the float. I'm fishing with quite a light terminal tackle. It's a £2 mainline, £2 Maxime in actual fact. I always use Maxime on still waters, simply because you can see a bit of a breeze today and you need to get that line below the surface, otherwise the float drifts all over the place. Should be mine in a minute. Very light shottings down the line. I'm fishing about 7 foot deep at the moment, so the fish is still about 3 foot under the water. A couple of turns. He's tiring now. Now I'll just let the rod do the work. He's not going to take off again. It's a great deal of knots. Just let the rod soak up the pressure. Be very patient, although it's not match fishing environment today. It's still enjoyable to get every fish you catch out. Here he comes. There we go. Looks like a mirror. The thing with these fish, never go for the net too early. Always make sure they're ready for the net before you actually go for them, because the final surge, they always have that little final surge as they see the net, and that's the time you can quite easily crack off. Now here he comes. Feed the net gently into the water and always bring the fish to the net, never take the net to the fish. It's about £1.5, maybe £2. Here he comes. Once you've got his head out the water, try and keep it out, keeping the pressure on all the time, and gently over the net. There we go. Lovely looking fish. Mirror, probably £2, £1.12, £2. Barbless hook comes straight the way out. Superb looking fish, look at that. Full of muscle. Think about this method, you've got to keep the bait reining in, keep it going in all the time. You're looking to get the fish up in the water. The problem with that is now we've netted that fish, the swimmer's probably gone a little bit quiet for a few minutes, so take time out to keep the bait going all the time. You notice that cast, a little flick. There's no need, we're only using a very light float, bottom only, very little chance of actually getting into a tangle. So long as you just stop the float the instant it hits the water and it lays all the shot neatly behind it, nice straight line. The very light shot then slowly falls through the water, and if you keep feeding all the time, just 10 or 20 maggots all the time, that hook is always falling through that cloud of bait as it's dropping. And as these fish come up in the water and start swimming through all the bait, they'll pick up your hook bait and off they rush. As I'm feeding fairly regularly and I'm using a very light hook, I'm using a light hook, it's a Tubertini Series 2. It's a lovely little maggot hook. It's a size 20 and it drops very slowly through the water. And I'm trying to catch fish on the drop, that's the object of the exercise. It's no good fishing big baits and, oh dear me, it's getting dangerous, getting boring this. Oh, this one's a bigger one again. If you use a very light hook and a very light bait, the actual drop through the water is far more natural. Now this is a bit bigger, it's gone around the corner again. I'm sat on an island here, so there's a bit of a gap to my left, and if they decide to go up there, I'm in all sorts of trouble. What you do find with fishing like this as well, you'll get shoals of fish moving. You'll probably get 3 or 4 fish fairly quick, and then you have to wait for 10 minutes or so before they actually move through again. It's a beautiful rod for this. It's a tippy action rod. Yeah, it's fairly soft through its middle joints, enabling you to absorb every lunge of the fish. Right, it's kiting now. No, he's in the mouth. No, he's not. He's under the mouth. Look at that, right under the mouth. That's why I couldn't get his head up. Hook them in the mouth, they come up quite easily. But with this one, you might just be able to see it. Just hooked under the mouth. See that? He's certainly not got off. He's real bony underneath there. What a lovely fish that is. Cool. Absolutely gorgeous. Mirror carp again. They've only got a certain row of scales down the side. First of all, let's have a close look at the rod and the reel. The rod, as I said, it's in actual fact it's a new rod. It's a prototype Browning that I've been putting through its paces today. It's a very middle action rod, and it's ideal for light hook lengths, 12 ounces, a pound, pound and a quarter. It's also been ideal for today because it's been able to absorb the rushes of those small carp. It's a very fine tip. It's got hard chrome rings on. It's personal preference. I use hard chrome rings. I know a lot of anglers prefer line rings, but that's something each to his own. The reel, it's a closed face reel, and you can see by the state it's in. Let's turn that round. It's quite old. This is about 12, 14 years old in actual fact. It's an Abu 507. There's quite a few closed face reels available on the marketplace nowadays. Divers do one, DAM do one, Silstar do one. In fact, most major manufacturers do a closed face reel. I like these, I've used them for many years, I'm quite happy with them. Simple to operate, it's a matter of pressing a button at the front of the spool, which releases the line. You then cast and then turn the handle, and then it's picked up again by the spool. You can in fact back wind on this. If you hook a decent sized fish, you can wind backwards, which is ideal for when you're playing these small ferocious carp. One thing I must add is when you actually purchase these spools, you can't back wind. There's a little gadget just positioned about here inside that you have to actually take out manually. But if you're not up to doing it, then I'm sure your local tackle shop will do it for you. Let's move down to the terminal tackle itself. Put the rod behind me. Right, firstly the float. As I mentioned earlier, it's a standard peacock float. Short length of peacock with a thin insert. Again, it's a peacock insert. Now this particular float is painted orange. I prefer orange, or blaze as it's known to us anglers, because I don't know why, I'm able to pick that particular colour out far easier than other colours. You can buy floats with yellow tips, red tips, or occasionally if you're fishing in white water, you're better off blacking it off completely. But today, a blaze tip's been ideal to pick out. It's locked quite simply in position. Let's just pull this by a silicone Waggler attachment. The Waggler is finished off with a small piece of dowel. That in then itself pushes into the Waggler attachment and is there quite snug. If ever the wind gets up, for argument's sake, and you feel you want a bigger float, then all you have to do is simply pull it out, push a bigger float in and change your shotting. This float in actual fact takes 3 BB. I have the equivalent of 2.5 BB situated right beneath the float. This is non-toxic shot. In fact, I prefer the Anchor double cut shot. It's got 2 BBs and a number 1 actually locking the float in position, and they seem kinder on the line than many other non-toxics. Coming down the line, let's just tighten this up a little bit. This is set at about 7 foot in depth. The shotting couldn't be more simpler. I have 3 number 9 shots equi-spaced over 7 foot. There's one about 2 foot 6 below the float, another one about 5 foot, and then one about 18 inches above the hook itself, which, as I said earlier, is a Tubertini Series 2, size 20. It's a very light, fine wire, fairly round bend hook, and if you notice them, they are in fact silver hooks. These came in from the continent 3 or 4 seasons ago, and they've taken off quite well. They're a very strong hook, although they're very fine. They have a very, very fine barb on them, but of course on the Makin fisheries you can't use barbs, so I've scrunched the barb down with a pair of pliers. Ideal for carp fishing. They unhook quickly, it's perfect. It's tied to 0.1 diameter monofil, which breaks at about 1.8 pounds, and the hook length itself is about 15 inches long. Simplicity itself. I say it's set at 7 foot, but as fish tend to come up in the water, it's just a matter of sliding the float down progressively and finding the optimum depth that the fish are feeding on. Oh, straight away. Don't miss it now. Oh, I've got one. Small fish. It's not a carp anyway. Very smooth these. Oh, it's one of them golden orf. There's quite a few orf in here, evidently. I think a few thousand gone into this venue. What a beautiful looking fish that is. Oh dear, look at that. Absolutely perfect. A net full of those will look quite spectacular. Right, before we look at the hardware, let's have a look at the float we'll be using today. In fact, I want to show you this float as well, but we'll come to that in a second. The float I'm going to be setting up in a minute is a Tubertini 6 gram float. It's a loaded float, which means that I only have to put a minimum amount of shot around the bottom of the float itself. This cuts down on line wear. Most float manufacturers now are bringing out a range of loaded floats. Midi, Peter Drennan, in fact most of the major manufacturers all have a range. And it's ideal for the simple reason, since lead is no longer allowed to be used on the line, you want to use as fewer non-toxic shots as you possibly can, because they do actually wear the line. So by using one of these, which if you look very closely, it's got Tubertini 5+1, there's actually 5 grams of loading in the base of the float itself. The float, to cock fully, will only take 1 gram. And if you purchase these, the anchor shots, you'll notice on there, you've got AA 0.08 of a gram. So in actual fact, 5+1, it should take about an AA and maybe a BB or a number 1. But no shotting is dead accurate, you have to do it by trial and error. Another float I want to show you, it's another Tubertini float, but this has the loading locked at the bottom of the float, but it is adjustable. You can see by unscrewing the base of the float, which the line passes through this little eye here. Whoops. The lead loading, and it is lead because so long as the lead is an integral part of the float, it is legal, actually fits onto this collar. So for argument's sake, if you want to fish with a float loaded to the equivalent of 3 AA, you just put 1 disc plus the equivalent 2 AA on the bottom, lock that in position, like so, and then that gives you equivalent of that amount of lead down the line to play with, which you'd probably break up into number 6s or number 8s. It's an ideal little system, and I'm sure over the next few years more and more lines like this will come into the marketplace. But for today we're using this loaded float, so why don't we put it on the line. Now you'll probably notice immediately that I'm using a different reel. When we start talking about fishing a Waggler distance, a closed face reel can become very restrictive. And in fact, using an open face reel. This is a Browning 810. Really, it's a standard open face reel with one unique difference. I'll turn the reel around so you can see better. If you notice, the spool's located on the front. You've got the standard bail arm system, a rear drag, but it has this very smooth I think it's secondary, but secondary, I don't know what you call it, secondary running area. And when the fish actually runs and the spool backwinds, you can see, as I pull the line, it goes backwards. And by actually running the finger, this index finger, against this smooth area, you can actually control the fish quite simply. It's ideal for handling big fish at distance. First of all, the float. It's a loaded float with a little eye at the bottom. I'm simply going to pass the line through the eye at the bottom. Quite simple. 5 grams plus 1, so I'm going to lock it with 2 of the equivalent of their BBs, which should be 0.8 of a gram. There's no need to compress this shot too hard onto the line. Don't forget it's not lead, and it does grip the line very well. Just a nice press with your fingers. I'm just going to drop it down the edge to see if it cocks. Well, that's nigh on perfect for the bulk shot. Let's now just place a few droppers under the float. Now this time I'm coming off the non-toxic and I'm going on to legal lead. This is Milo lead shot, and every size of shot in this particular box is legal. It's all under the 0.05 grams. And first of all, I'm just going to put a couple of equivalents of number 9s. That's 3 of those. And 1 number 10. Right, let's just see how that cocks in the water. I think 1 more number 8, sorry, number 9 on that, and that's just about perfect. Right. At the very end of the line, I'm going to tie a simple loop. Always wet the loops just before you tighten them up. It helps save, compress the line, so damaging it. Simple loop at the end of the line. I'm going to set the depth initially around 7 foot. I'm then going to have 3 of those number 8s, number 9s, around 2.5 foot above the hook length. 1 a foot above the hook length, and then at the final, number 10 shot, or number 9 shot, right on the hook length loop itself. I never try and put shots on the hook length because you're using quite thin diameter lines and you don't want to weaken that whatsoever. It's then a matter of attaching the hook, which once again, Tubertini Series 2 to 0.1, I'll show you that, to 0.1 diameter line, and I still prefer the standard half blood knot connecting loop. It's a matter of passing the hook length line through the loop, spinning the line so you get 4 or 5 turns, and then passing the hook length through and pulling gently, again wetting it to prevent tightening. Trim the excess line. And there we have the hook length neatly attached to the main line. That is now ready for fishing. But of course we can't fish without any bait. Whereas with the small waggler we used loose fed maggots, with our bigger waggler we're going to use ground bait. So let's mix it up. Everybody's got their own opinions about ground bait. I mean, you can see here there's a host of packaged ground baits already on the market. You've got Van der Nine, you've got Gears Lucas, and you've got Sensus, which I've been using quite a bit of Sensus over the last few years. And I'm going to start off by sticking a little bit of River in. Now River's quite a sticky ground bait, and all it basically does is enables me to catapult the ground bait distance without it exploding into a million pieces. I'm also going to try a little bit of this new Lucas Special. It's a fairly lightweight ground bait, and it should help cloud up once it's entered the water and attract a few fish into the swim. Certainly smells nice. I can understand why the fish like it. And my old favourite, Sensus Lake. To be honest, on a fishery like this, I honestly don't believe that whatever ground bait you throw in is going to make a great deal of difference. But it's ideal for appreciating the finer skills of mixing your ground bait and getting to familiarise yourself with exactly what the ground baits do. Add a touch of water. People tell me I should use a sponge for this, but Mrs keeps nicking it and cleaning the car. That's just about right. Now, no ground bait is complete without its additives, and today I'm using hemp seed, because I know carp, they love hemp seed, and they'll home in on it and they'll search it out on the bottom. A good liberal dose of hemp seed. Casters, superb all-round bait. Again, it'll lie on the bottom and attract loads of fish into your peg. Plenty of casters. Maggots. Well, I'm a bit reluctant to put too many maggots into ground bait, and the reason being because they're very active, and you try and catapult a ball of ground bait at distance, they can end up causing the ball of ground bait to explode. So I'm only putting just a token sample of those in as hook bait. And finally, a few squats. Squats, very tiny maggots. Again, once they're in the ground bait and they're introduced to the water, they'll lie on the bottom, fairly inert, and attract the fish into the peg. And that's the mix. Very simple, a concoction of everything. You can imagine that when it's lying on the bottom, everything that's swimming around is going to be attracted to it. Come on, let's go and catch a few fish. Think about it, is when you're fishing on the bottom like this, because you're fishing ground bait and you're concentrating the fish on the bottom, always keep the bait slightly moving. Just keep twitching it and moving it a little bit and raising the bait off the bottom so it drops, and all of a sudden the fish will come in and take. Oh, now this is a carp. Much more powerful rod than that last one I was using. Because I've beefed up the main line and the hook length, you're able to exert far more pressure on the fish than you could last time. And because I'm fishing at a much bigger distance, there's much less risk of actually cracking off as the fish takes, because there's far more line and there's far more give in everything. Oop. Yeah, it's a little carp. Come on, get your head up. There's a nice little fish. Look at them. Never give up till they're in the net, these things. There you go. Beautiful condition, little common this. immaculate, not a fin out of place, not a scale out of place. In fact, we're building up quite a nice little catch here at the moment. And again, now this is a bigger fish. A much bigger fish. I don't even know if it's snagged. No, he's just running along. Backwind a bit on this one. This is going to be the biggest fish so far. The thing about these bigger carp, they're much more dogged. They're just a powerhouse that don't shoot off so quick. They just, now he's starting to take a little bit of line. They're just so difficult to get off the bottom. Patience. Being a matchman, you tend to try and rush things. We're all the time in the world today, so just take it steady. He's messing getting his head up in. Look at the bend in the rod. It's incredible, really. I mean, the power these fish have got. Come on. The boredom factor starts to come in now. Come on. Typical, get it right the way across. Oh, it's a lovely fish, this one. Whoosh, big swirl. He's getting fitter as he comes across, this one. No, it's mine now, it's coming up, it's coming up, it's coming up. Come on. No, still hasn't come up. Phew. Oh, it's a lovely fish, this. Look at that. Yes. I should put my bigger net up. Oh, that's a cracking fish. What a superb. Well, that's by far the biggest fish so far. Problem is now, oh, look in the thing. Oh, it's top of his nose. No wonder I couldn't get his head up. What a cracking fish that is. Look at that. Absolutely. Whoa! Mouthful of slime. What a lovely fish that is, eh? What a cracker. Maybe three and a bit pounds. Full of muscle, beautiful proportions. Big powerful tail. See how big that tail is. One swoop of that and you can take 20 yards of line off. Let's drop him back gently into the net. Had some nice carp up to £3. Had some beautiful golden orf. A few ghost carp, pound and a quarter. Mind you, a fishery like this, what you expect, it's stuffed to the gunnels with fish. Today we've talked about two methods of waggler fishing, in fact two extremes. We used a very short, lightweight 3BB peacock waggler, loose fed maggots, and we caught on the drop. The other extreme, we've used a 6 gram, which is equivalent to about 4 swan shot, and we've gone quite a comfortable distance with ground bait, casters and hemp. Both have produced, as you expect on a fishery like this, loads of fish. It's been a superb day's sport. As I mentioned earlier, venues like this are springing up all over the country and they're ideal test beds for not only trying your tackle out, but catching plenty of fish. And that's what fishing's all about.
Here we have the most basic of all waggler rigs. Straight peacock, attached bottom end only through the eye, locked by 2 shot, just enough to cock the float to the colour. Down the line, single dust shot or a number 6 shot, depending on conditions, with the hook just touching the bottom. Completely tangle-free rig. Creates one problem, however, if you're fishing still waters. The thickness of the tip, being a very buoyant material like peacock, will not allow a lift bite to be shown if the bottom shot is displaced. And for this reason, we would move on to an inserted peacock waggler. You notice the very fine cane antenna in the tip of the float. Again, 2 locking shot would take the float down to this point here, where it just sits on the tip of the peacock, on the extra dust shot or number 6 shot that you have down the line here will move the float down until it's seated halfway or 2/3 along the cane inset. If a fish picks up the bait, lifts up the bait from the bottom and displaces this telltale shot here, that in turn allows the float to rise, and out of the water comes the insert. You have a lift bite. If it intercepts it on the way down, you get the same sort of situation where the float will sit on the top of the peacock and will not go down on the insert. That indicates the fish has stopped that telltale shot from reaching its rightful position. If you want further casting range, you increase the size of the float or the thickness of the peacock and the shot carrying capacity. Here we have a similar type float, much thicker, 2 locking shot either side of the float. Down the line, again, the telltale shot. An ideal rig probably cast twice as far as the first rig. If, however, we've got a great deal of undertow on the water, we would switch this rig here to this kind of rig here now, where we've reduced the float, the lead on the float, to 2 weights. Down the line, we've moved 2 weights, and again, the dropping shot. It looks a simple rig. When the water is towing, what will happen, those 2 extra weights down the line will provide greater stability and will slow the progress of the float down as it trips along with the current. There's one slight drawback to it. Although it looks perfectly simple, that rig that you have just seen will not cast. The reason being, casting distance isn't only related to the amount of weight that you have on the line, it's related to the positions of the weight. Now, if you bulk all the weight together underneath the float, then you'll get the optimum casting distance. If you split the weights, then you effectively halve the distance. You can demonstrate this quite clearly. Set up your tackle, pinch 2 swan shot on the line, both together, and cast as far as it'll go. You mark the distance, it may go 25, 30 yards. Take those 2 swan shot, split them, let's say 1 yard apart, better still 4 or 5 feet apart, cast in, and you would expect it to go the 25, 30 yards. In actual fact, you'll be lucky if you can get it anywhere near 20 yards, probably 15 yards is the distance. If you split the weight, you halve the casting range. Now, if we go back to this diagram here again, where we have split the weight, instead of casting our 20 yards, now we can only go 10 yards. And if the fish are at a range of 20 yards, we're going to be well short. So what we do from here now, we'd take a similar rig, we'll move to this diagram here now. You notice we've moved to a bodied float now. The peacock, we're going beyond the shot carrying capacity of the peacock. So we use the bodied peacock float, which takes considerably more weight. Down the line, we still have the 2 weights to slow down the drift. And we've replaced those 2 shot by 3 either side of the float. Now, believe it or not, that rig there now will cast just about the same distance as this rig here. So in actual fact, we have 4 shot on that rig. Move along to this rig here, we have 6 plus 2, we have 8 shot. So if you move weight down the line, you have to double the shot carrying capacity of the float to equal at least the range that you would cast with bulk shot. And of course, if the water is towing considerably, as all still waters do, even with a slight breeze, you want to produce a braking effect wherever possible. And the way to do this is to lay a long tail of line which will be dragging slowly along the bottom. We'll go to this rig here now to demonstrate how that would be done. You'd have the casting weight either side of the float. Down the line we have our bulk shot, and you notice the long curve in the line. This is probably fishing now 2 or 3 foot over depth, and down here the telltale shot is now dragging along the bottom, which creates that braking effect. If it's still going a little bit too quickly, we can split these two shot even further. Let's take this bottom shot here, we'd split that into 2 smaller shots, leave one there, put the other smaller shot in this position here, and we'd now be dragging 2 shots along the bottom. The more weight you drag along the bottom, the greater the braking effect. The final rig, I don't propose to go into this rig into too much detail, as I'll be covering this one in the river fishing. But we have a straightforward peacock waggler, weighted either side, shot spread down the line in a typical stick float rig. I believe they call it a shirt button rig nowadays. Move along a little bit farther, a waggler again for the river, and instead of splitting the shot at say 9 inches or 12-inch intervals, we put a bulk 2/3 of the depth, just shot down, dragging the bottom. Now this rig, although it appears to be a river rig, it is in actual fact a very, very good rig indeed for fishing reasonably still waters. Now by still I'm talking about waters that are not too greatly affected by the wind. It's the inserted peacock, just enough weight to cast the range, a little bit of bulk down to provide a nice bit of stability in the wind, and the telltale dropper to give the lift bite. This rig here is the one that I'm going to use first of all when we go to our first location. We're going to be fishing a fairly big lake, weather permitting. It will not be too windy. We'll have to choose our location fairly well. And we want to obtain a little bit of movement on the float, just enough to attract the bream that we're going to be chasing after. We'll be using a ground bait and squat technique. I think you like this first location. Well, here we are at the first location. Again, one of my favourite venues, nice and local, so Clive, the cameraman, doesn't have to walk too far. And we set up basically with the Waggler rig, as I discussed before. First of all, I go through the important part of the tackle. The reel, a normal open face casting reel. I prefer them to the closed face reels. Much better for playing big fish. You've got the facility to back wind. I personally find that I don't get as many tangles with these reels. The line, as you'll be able to see, is built up right close to the rim of the spool on the reel. The reason for this, if you have it deep and dished, in other words not enough line on the spool, then you'll get a lot of friction coming off the reel. You'll not be able to cast the required range. The reel in question, being a matchman, I like to switch around quite a bit. And the one that I've settled on this season, in fact for the last 2 years, is a Shimano reel. It's a nice, smooth flowing reel, and it has a very important facility, particularly for all pleasure anglers, which is a fighting lever. This is the one here. Allows you to set a nice amount of drag and tighten up at any time. Not something used by matchmen. We tend to play our fish by allowing the reel to back wind like so and applying finger pressure. Personal quirk, most matchmen fish the same way. Once we set up the line, as we're waggler fishing, it's important to fish with a sunken line at all times. That way the wind doesn't influence the float, it doesn't drag it, the surface drift doesn't affect it. And most lines tend to lie on the surface because of the surface tension. There's a simple way around that. Trusty old bottle here is full of nothing more complicated than washing up liquid, would you believe? Fairy soap. 1 part fairy liquid to 2 parts water. I apply this to the spool, give it a good dousing down. That will now break down all the surface tension and allow me to fish with a sunken line. Always carry one, don't make it too strong, 1 part liquid to 2 parts water. The rod. If I'm going to be fishing long range, as I tend to do with most of my lake fishing on the Waggler, I like a long rod, something that will allow me to strike and pick up a good length of line. For this reason, I always plumb for a 14-foot rod. 13 is adequate, 12 unfortunately is not long enough. So if you're contemplating buying tackle for Waggler fishing, start at 13 foot, finish at 14. The 15-foot rods and the 18-foot rods are a little bit long, a little bit unwieldy. This is a beautiful length for long range. I've already set up the float. As we discussed, it's an inserted peacock Waggler, a thin peacock insert. The weights, as per the drawings before. Again, as lead is barred all over the country now, I'm using Sandvik safe weight weights, 2 large shot with a 1-inch gap, 2 smaller ones to balance the float. Another alternative when you're Waggler fishing is to use this product by Sandvik. It's a tungsten tubing, very heavy, same density as lead. Put it to length, thread the line through the hole in the centre, put in a little plug or stop it with a stop shot, and you have the same facility given by lead weights. It works perfectly well, but as the diagram showed shot either side of the float, this is the way I'm going to fish today. I haven't as yet chosen a hook or put any weight down the line. The reason being, first of all, I'm going to try out the depth. I fished a lake before. It's somewhere in the region of about 5 to 6 feet deep. But when you're Waggler fishing, you always have a problem trying to get the correct depth. As I explained before, if you put a lot of weight underneath the float and split it with a lot of weight down by the hook, i.e. a plummet, you will not be able to cast. So the ideal compromise is to shot the float until it's almost ready. In other words, the only thing missing is the telltale shot down the line. Pinch on a weight near the hook. This one is a BB shot. It's a Sandvik safe weight BB, clipped on, down by the line. I haven't tied the hook yet, and we're now ready to cast. The rod, as you can see, is a good through action rod. It's 14 foot. It's the Shimano XXX 14. Again, not being sponsored by anyone, I'm free to choose the tackle I want. And competing at a high level of match fishing every weekend, I've got to go for the best. Unfortunately, it's Japanese, but it's the best available at the moment, so I'm quite happy with it. There is the weight down the line. I'm going to overcast, and that shot should sink the float if it's off the bottom to give me a rough idea of the depth. A nice, steady overarm cast. Lands with a bit of a splash because it isn't correctly balanced because of the weight being down. And there you see, I've actually set the tackle a little bit too deep. The float, as you can see, is still about 2 inches above the surface, which means the bottom weight is still on the bottom and the float is probably 6 inches a foot too deep. I'll bring it back, reduce the depth a little bit. Notice how easily the safe weights slide down the line. Take it down about 9 inches to a foot. I should be very close to the depth there. Again, a nice steady overarm cast. Again, it lands terrible. And there you can see the float has just disappeared beneath the surface. In other words, I'm fishing 6 inches or so too shallow. That's close enough for me. By the time I've tied a hook length, which will be a foot or so, I'll now be trailing the bottom by about 6 inches. Under the weight, back into the container, ready to shot up the line. There isn't much wind, just a slight breeze, a little bit overcast, ideal fishing conditions, so I'm looking forward to catching a few fish. I'm going to put down the line, a little bit of bulk shot, which will consist of 2, maybe 3 number 6 shot. We'll just give that a try first of all. Swing it out, just see how the float cocks. Absolutely perfect, within, oh, half an inch of the tip of the float. That's perfect. Now what I'm going to do is to take one of these number 6 shot, slide it down the line, so the rig is a number 6 shot as a drop shot, as a dropper to show the lift bites, 2 number 6 shot 18 inches higher than that. That will give me the stability if the water starts to tow a little bit. And I should say that shot, the bottom drop shot, is now 6 inches off the bottom. Absolutely perfect for the job I'm trying to do today. The hook, as always, as I'm float fishing, I'm not going for really big fish. I like a fine wire match hook. My choice is the Drennan carbon caster. Strong hook, but fine enough not to give you problems with the bites. The line, again, as always, Drennan double strength. Thinnest line on the market. I'm using 1.25 pound hook length, which is probably the diameter of a normal 3/4 pound plus line. The reel line, £2, Drennan floatfish. And as I explained, it's a floating line, doesn't get down below the surface drift, picks up the wind quite a bit until I put on that washing up liquid. Breaks down the surface tension, and there's also another little dodge which helps to sink the line. I'm going to show you now. The cast. Make sure there are no obstructions around you. Even the landing net is well out of the way. I beg your pardon, the rod rest. The landing net is out of the way. The cast is a simple overarm cast. Feather it. Set the bail arm. Now to make sure the line sinks, I give it 2 or 3 little flicks like so. Bury the rod, top section, under the surface of the water and reel in half a dozen quick turns. And now the float is set in position, the line is sunk in a dead straight line between the rod tip and the float. There's now going to be no influence at all from the wind or the surface drift. There shouldn't really be any need to ground bait anymore now until the fish stop feeding. There's a bite on the drop. Nice upward strike. Swing it round to the left-hand side. Keep the rod very, very low. Reel in until it's ready to lift, and up we go. And they said there was no roach in the water. Haven't been feeding very well at all lately, the roach haven't. Beautiful little specimen. It's not really what we're after, but it's a matchman's bread and butter. Just damaged one of the maggots. I'll replace one of them. Off again. Couple of flicks again. Bring it down. There's a nice lift bite. Should be a bream. Yeah, that's a better fish. Keep the rod down. Whoa, 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 it's starting to head for those weeds. Gonna have to put quite a bit of side strain on now, keep it away from those weeds. Oh dear, no, it's gone solid. Oh, good grief. It's gone straight into that bed of weeds over there. Must be one of those carp or tench. I can still feel it bumping on the end. What I'm going to do is a dodge that often works wonders. Going to let the line go slack. Give it a couple of minutes, see if it will go. Yes, it's just come free from that weed bed now. Works wonders giving them a little bit of slack line, you know, it must make them feel a little bit more secure. And instead of burying the head, he's come right on the road. He's trying to get him a keep net now. Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't know what this is now. He's going a little bit, moved a little bit fast for a tench. Feels more like a carp. Notice how I'm not using the slipping clutch as it goes, a back wind. Watch the real back wind now. Trying to keep him, bit of side strain, keep the devil away from those weeds. He knows he's pretty safe there. Feels like a good fish, good solid fish. Can't be too adventurous at the moment. So I've only got a fine wire hook on, and I think it's 1.25 pound double strength, so I've got to be a little bit careful. Now it's starting to go again, back wind. Just let the reel go gently. The alternative, of course, would be to use the slipping clutch. I'll try to demonstrate that there now. Switch that over there. You find the line will go, the clutch actually slips. There you can hear it now. Unfortunately, you can't wind it until you tighten the fighting lever. Again, try the slipping clutch on it. Switch it over. There you can see. Not the recognised way of playing fish for matchmen. I'll tighten that up and I'll play it the normal matchman's way, which is on the back wind. Yes, I just saw him there now. It's a nice carp. Now don't you dare come off now. I hope this one isn't camera shy. There he is on top. Good fish, good fish. Looks 4 or 5 pound. Starting to go again. You see the advantage now of having the top quality fishing tackle. You could easily use a cheaper reel, and as the fish starts to go, release your finger that I have here on the reel. And if it's a cheap reel, it may well jam. There you see how easily it back winds. Getting tired now. So am I. My arm's starting to ache a little bit. I know somebody's shooting. Won't be a bad idea to shoot this thing here. My arm's dropping off. Come on, fella. There he is now. Good grief, what are they shooting out there? There we are, he's on top, he's ready. Don't grab for the net until the fish is beaten. Keep it coming along. Nice and gentle, don't reach out. Notice how much line I've got out. A lot of line. Fish over the net, nice and gentle. Hold him there, don't try to lift him. Put your rod down. Bring the net in nice and steady. If you've got a fiberglass net, you must be a little bit careful because they break quite easily. And there we have him. Nicely lip hooked. Carbon caster hook, it's only a microbarb, comes out ever so easily. And how's that? What a beautiful specimen. I know I shouldn't say this, I'll get him bad books, but it's definitely better looking than the wife. I won't put him in the keep net. Let him go back nice and steady. And I think that rounds off a nice afternoon's fishing.